In a trauma bond or in these more chaotic dynamics, it's really a hormonal cocktail that's kind of anchoring it in. You get these really big dopamine spikes when you are engaging in the drama, and then it moves into the conflict cycle, and that's the cortisol spike. And then you move through that cycle into repair. And then you get this flood of oxytocin. Imagine repeating that cycle over and over and over in a really dramatic relationship. That really creates a sense of bonding. I remember I had been locked in the bathroom and I was looking in the mirror at my own reflection and I could barely recognize myself. He, had sort of just left our home with all of his belongings in the home, just sort of ghosted me. I lost all of my money. Everything has been taken. He came in to grab some things. As he drove off down that road, I stood there on the side of the road and I had no shoes on. We tend to clarify our environment and the people who are meant to walk with by showing up as our most authentic self in the present moment. And that either qualifies people to remain in our lives or it clarifies that they're no longer a fit.
What is it in your experience that confuses us from a somatic experience between chemistry that's intense and true love?
Well, I think what's interesting about trauma bonds is that they're this really intense attachment that are formed through highs and lows. So you're basically going on a roller coaster with somebody and that's how you're bonding with them, right? And that is not obviously love, but it's the most familiar thing. And so for a lot of us, our original imprint of what we would maybe unconsciously deem love is uncertainty or chaotic or disorganized in some way. And so there is this imprint in the nervous system of anticipation or uncertainty or excitement or that high and low. And so, from a nervous system neurology standpoint, when we're engaging with people who bring that sensation to us, they activate that experience in us. It's not necessarily healthy or true love, but it is familiar. And so that's what most of us are working through when it comes to our relationship patterns in general, is a full rewire of the nervous system and the neurology of what it actually feels like to be in safe, healthy love without it feeling boring or, too understimulating.
Many of my friends have said comments like, I really like this person, but there's no roller coaster. There's no charge. I'm sure this has come up in your circles, right? Mm-hmm. And I wanted to start here because this is a really interesting paradox when we look at what love actually is. Love, the way I've found it with my marriage, is this beautiful undulation where, yes, there's highs and lows, but there's not extremes like these ups and downs and peaks and valleys. And I wonder, from all your studies, a mutual friend of ours is Mark Wolin. When we look at the lens of intergenerational healing and essentially almost like, Shay, a glass that has a hammer that's hit it and that lens becomes shattered. And then we look at all love through essentially a shattered lens until we figure out through work like yours how to have a new lens. What's going on with the shattering in our body? What happens in the body during this confusion of intensity versus grounded true love?
Well, in a trauma bond or in these, more chaotic dynamics, it's really a hormonal cocktail that's kind of anchoring it in, right? Because you get these really big dopamine spikes when you are engaging in the drama. And like drama is in even like that passionate romance, the drama of like the intensity of this fantasy that you're building together. And then it moves into the conflict cycle, and that's the cortisol spike, right? And that's that fight or flight mode. And then you move through that cycle into repair. And then you get this flood of oxytocin. And so it's, oxytocin is that love hormone. It's that happy chemical. It's the most powerful love hormone. When you have a child, your whole body is just flooded with it. I'm sure you're very familiar. And so, imagine repeating that cycle over and over and over in a really dramatic relationship. That really creates a sense of bonding. we've been through things together. We've been through so much. And really, it's just this, manufactured roller coaster, as you put it, of highs and lows that's happening in the brain. And yeah, you're right. That is not how a relationship is really meant to be. But for many of us, that is, what we recognize, because that was our conditioning.
It's excellent that you said that. I think about what happened in 1776. I've mentioned this before, so my audience is going to be like, we already heard this, man. But I promise you, this relates to what Shay potentially will answer. We came over from England to America, and what did we do? We essentially took out an entire race of people because that's what was being done to us in England. In other words, the unconscious was not conscious. And now we see this at scale with the advent of technology rising and rising women like yourself. I think about the way that power can corrupt, but really more the neural tree can corrupt. We unconsciously enact the behaviors of our caregivers or our controllers. And I love my mother and father, and we all get to figure out that path. Do you find that these learned behaviors that get encoded essentially into our epigenome are really expressing themselves for healing? Don't you feel like this is really just a micro and a macro of our system, our electrical system, desiring homeostasis, desiring peace, yet we have to experience its opposite and its intensity to find the middle?
Yeah, I like that frame. I think our souls all come here on a journey of experience gathering and wisdom collection. And I do believe that that's, unique to each of us. So we all have a slightly different soul path or a signature that we're here to go through, and leaving room for that is really important. And knowing that in any relationship, there's always work to be done and healing to happen. But the really, really chaotic and really, really dramatic ones where it's really painful and it feels like you're kind of banging your head against a wall, maybe you can work through that together, or maybe the lesson is actually just in walking away and choosing your peace. And, to speak to your point of, the mother-father imprint, what I have come to learn is that, every single generation, we're just doing a little bit better than what our parents did. And there is this natural, beautiful blooming of healing and evolution that occurs. And, I think those of us who are parents who were born in, 80s, 90s, 2000s. It's crazy to say that people born in the 2000s could be parents, but that's where we're at. So, I think we have a unique advantage to healing and to evolution that the previous generations just really didn't have. They didn't have information at their fingertips. They didn't have the exposure, and they didn't even have the language or the openness or the intimacy, right? Like, people didn't talk openly and vulnerably about their challenges, about their fears, about love, any of it. So I really do feel that we are, beyond blessed and fortunate at this time to even have the capacity to do the kind of work that we're doing as parents and as change makers.
It's a luxury.
Yeah. I mean, I was talking to my mother-in-law. She's in her 70s, right? She's like nearing 80 now. And she's like, yeah, like if I wanted to know anything, I would have to go to the library and try to find something. And then the other piece to that is it would have to be innate in you to even know, to have something awaken in you where you're like, hey, this doesn't feel right. Everyone around me is doing this and everything around me is this way. So there would have to be this innate awakening in you to even signal that you should go out and seek something else, right? Whereas now we're just kind of bombarded with all of these different opinions and beliefs and lifestyles, which can be disorienting, but it also gives us an opportunity to check ourselves and be like, oh, maybe am I doing this the way that I feel is right and integral? They just didn't have that. They didn't have that. And the conditioning and the programming that they did have was like really negative.
Yes. Very survival based in many ways. I think about my lineage. And do you know, in work you've done with sacred tribes and just honestly your work over the past decade plus, 20 years you've been in this work, yes?
I mean, I would say more like 15. I haven't really done any like sacred tribe work. Like I haven't like traveled and gone and stayed with sacred tribes or anything like that.
But you've connected to, I'm sure, in ceremonies and also in just work, many veins of work,
Yeah.
to the generational lineage that created you. You know, we are a byproduct of, I think it's thousands and thousands of men and women that loved each other enough to birth life into the world.
Mhm.
And I think about the way that we can honor them through my work in emotional epigenetics, your work in giving people this home where they can actually learn what it feels like and have their fingers on the tapestry of what it truly means to be the one. I'm curious if you've ever been asked this, you know, when we become the one,
Yeah.
there's a certain felt sense. There's a somatic understanding. It's not just a mental thing where somebody can read your book or do your guided journal. There's this transformation that happens when we really embody the one. What does the one actually mean to you, the one?
For me, it's really a landing at home in yourself. It's really not that complex. You know, we think of it like this, you know, we are born connected to oneness. We are born in this infinite oneness, this energy of connection to the divine. And then we are brought back down to earth. And in many ways, we spend our early childhood projecting, you know, God and oneness onto our parents. And that's part of where the rupture occurs because, of course, humans can never live up to that. And so that's where the wound begins, right? Is this, you know, letdown of the human that was meant to be God for us. And so there is this endless searching then once we enter the stage of seeking romantic partnership to find that oneness again. And we're looking for it outside of ourselves. We're looking for it in another. And for me, becoming the one simply means you remember that you are innately whole and connected to the divine, and you're not seeking somebody to complete you or to save you or to rescue you. You're simply returning to the seat of your own soul. And then through that, you can call in a partner who you want to do life with in a way that is honoring of both of your soul's paths and also really honoring of both of you and your individuality. And then you can co-create something that is only born through the two of you sort of putting down your egos together and merging as a couple. But if we try to do that divine merging as a couple without that foundation of self-respect and self-love and self-trust, then it looks a lot different. So there needs to be a sense of self and a real sense of self-awareness and understanding and trust before we move to that stage.
It's interesting you said project the oneness and the understanding of God onto our parents. Page 159, I just flipped it open. I didn't even know we were going to talk about this. You said a thing to remember. A projection is when you're experiencing a wound or betrayal from the past as if it's happening in the present moment. In the past, meaning from source creation. In the present moment, meaning, oh my gosh, my mom and dad aren't God. Can you expand on that a little bit? If you've ever blown up your life for no logical reason, congratulations. Your biology works. You're not broken. You're just running an old pattern. After 10 years of podcasting and interviewing 800 plus of the sharpest minds and deepest hearts on planet Earth, I built something simple to help you interrupt these patterns fast. I kept running personally into the same stuff, and audience members would write to me and say, Josh, I'm dealing with the same core 3 things, which are expressed through emotional epigenetics that are our emotional patterns, our unconscious beliefs, and our environment. This self-liberation blueprint is a free training where you get clear on how these 3 areas are blocking your life. And in 10 days, you can move from being stuck and distorted on the inside to clear and on purpose on the outside. The self-liberation blueprint is a 10-day jumpstart that's perfect for the human being that feels stuck, but they just can't figure out why. Now, I built this with no smoke and mirrors. I know in our world, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors when it comes to personal growth and spiritual development. I built this with 24 years of my own health, wellness, and personal development life experience. So I can save you money and save you time and start getting your results as quickly as possible. On your first day, you're going to go right into a self-assessment where we know exactly where you are and exactly where you get to be. We're going to take you through a dream vision process and specific breath work to create your life vision that you desire in the future as if it's here right now. All of this is free because I'm here to give it to you as a mentor in the same way that my mentors gave it to me. It is purely just my gift to you. You also get free access to the Liberated Life Tribe, a community of people like you and I that are actually doing the inner work instead of just pretending that they're fine. By the time you're done, you're going to know exactly where you are in your wellness pentagon, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and financially. And you're going to have a map, a mindful action plan to move from clarity instead of distortion. This is not therapy for people that are broken. You're not broken. You're just bioenergetically burdened. And I'm here to tell you that removing these burdens is possible. And I believe you can do it. You don't need fixing. You just get to have a clear starting point and a plan that actually works with your biology. If you're ready to move forward with your life without forcing it, join me inside the Self-Liberation Blueprint by heading over to liberatedlife.com. Come join us.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. When you're born, they're solely responsible for keeping you alive. They're the only world you know. They're your everything. And so, in a sense, that is, that's life and creation itself. So that's a very godlike energy. And then inevitably they don't meet all of our needs, or they don't understand us fully, or they don't respond to us the way that we needed them to, or they have their own human moments like we all do. And that creates a wound. And then that's where that, that falling from grace, that separation, that fear happens. And that's where I see we go into these cycles of, constantly seeking the divine, constantly seeking mother, father, constantly seeking healing in another person. And of course, I really do believe and know from experience that we can heal deeply in relationship, and that romantic relationships are a beautiful container for that. But we do have to enter with self-responsibility and self-awareness. Otherwise, it's just really not possible, because we've given too much of the power and the leadership over that healing to the other person. And so then we're not actually in charge of our own healing anymore. We're really expecting them to sort of rescue us. So it shifts from this co-creative container to almost a helplessness, right? And that's not a healing.
To me, it feels like the palpability is like a learned helplessness. You mentioned that the conditioning from, our parents and grandparents, like they didn't have the spaciousness to even have a conversation like this with tens of thousands of people across the world. Like it didn't exist. So we're so blessed. Yet with this great power comes an equal responsibility. Do you feel a responsibility to not just bring women back home to themselves? Because I know your work is geared primarily towards women, but when a woman begins to unravel and really step into full womanness or womanhood, whatever terms you'd like to use, it really shines a mirror on the man in a relationship to look at the parts of him that are projecting mother wound or projecting father wound onto the mother. Have you found that this is a common thread in your work with women, that when the woman really starts to unravel and heal, truly heal to become the one, it inspires or it pushes away her partner if she's in a heteronormative relationship?
I've seen that on both sides. I mean, I have the luxury of witnessing, my husband, Ben, he works with men and he runs an organization of like 700 men through brotherhood chapters. And so I really see that this is sort of a universal thing. I don't really understand why it is the case, but it seems like most often in couples, one person decides to wake up first, and it's very rare and special when two people sort of light bulb moment at the same time. They're like, let's do the work together and let's just be better. It's like usually there's this push pull, or there's this resistance, or there's this like, I'm going to quit drinking. But, the other person is like, no, I'm not going to quit drinking. I want to get drunk on weekends and you're no fun anymore. And it's really this push pull dynamic. So when two people really decide to do it together, I think that's just rare and magnificent. But it tends to be that way. We tend to clarify our environment and the people who are meant to walk with by showing up as our most authentic self in the present moment. And that either qualifies people to remain in our lives, or it clarifies that they're no longer a fit. And generally people will find their way out if they're not, feeling the change or the transformation in you.
How many men were you in learning-ship with before you met your husband?
I would say I had 3 or 4 really serious relationships. I started dating really young, right? I was living out on my own at 16. So I had my first relationship, I guess you could say, at 16. So I dated 4 men prior to Ben. And all of those relationships were really, all but one were really, really hard. Really, really hard.
And by hard, you mean you extracted lessons or you weren't at that level of consciousness yet?
I always have extracted lessons. I mean, the first one when I was 16, I think it was really more just me observing my own patterns. In the later relationships, they all taught me a lot. I saw a lot of my own healing work. I had really powerful visions of the work that I was here to do. In one of my abusive relationships, when I was in my I was like 19 years old, and I remember I had been locked in the bathroom and I was looking in the mirror at my own reflection and I could barely recognize myself. And then all of a sudden I just had this opening in the top of my crown and I literally saw a vision of my future self on stage speaking to women. And I got this message, like, this is a part of your learning. You're here to do work with women. You're here to help women. And I told him that actually, and he just looked at me like I was crazy. And obviously that relationship ended pretty swiftly. But I've always found that for me, my really, really dark experiences and all of my traumas have always felt very purposeful. Ever since I was about 3 years old, I can remember my first dreams and I was receiving insights and messages even at that time. And it's all felt like one big, beautiful earth school for me. So, I feel grateful that for every single thing that I've experienced, because it's really led me to this place where I've been able to alchemize a lot of lessons, and that's helped me a lot.
The mother wound that Wolin shares in his work, for me, there was a radical healing that I've shared with my audience recently that just came up this year. And I'm curious for you. I know your mom dealt with a lot of mental health issues. My mom is manic bipolar, so I'm no stranger to understanding what it's like to come into the world and choose a mother who has her own very unique challenges. I'll just put that lightly. But I'm curious for you, the mother wound, and then if you were to walk a timeline to staring in the mirror at 19 and having these essentially kind of cosmic downloads in the bathroom, was there a wound specific to your mother that took the longest for you to soften?
Yeah, the wound with my mother, I really didn't face until I was in my mid-20s, and I went through a divorce. And it's just always funny when I call it a divorce, because it's like we got married, but we weren't really even in love. We sort of got married because we were from different countries and we really wanted to try to work out our relationship. It wasn't one of those things where we were in love and we got engaged and, it was this whole thing. But that person and I both had very, very deep mother wounds. And our whole relationship was built on smoke and mirrors and projection. So it was all very emotionally diluted and focused on, sort of demonization of each other. And when our relationship ended, there was a lot of betrayal. I was really betrayed in so many ways. And that woke up my mother wound finally. And so he, had sort of just left our home with all of his belongings in the home, just sort of ghosted me. I lost all of my money. Everything has sort of been taken. And then he just sort of ditched without a word. And there was this time where he returned back with this new woman he was dating, and she was parked outside in their red SUV. And he came in to grab some things. And then I kind of followed him out. And as he drove off down that road, I stood there on the side of the road, just outside of the wood fence, and I had no shoes on. And as I watched their car drive away, all of a sudden, I just had this flashback of being 3 and being in the arms of foster parents in the middle of the night and watching my mom's headlights drive off and me kicking and screaming and, begging for her to come back. And in that moment, I really felt clear. Okay, this is not about him. This is really about me. This is my own inner work. And this is these old wounds that are coming up to be cleared. And that was a relief because I was like, okay, well, as desperate as I feel for this pain to go away, at least I know that he doesn't actually have to come back, or he doesn't have to do anything in order for me to be okay. I can actually work through this and be okay. And so that really catalyzed it for me. And that was a big, big moment in my journey.
Probably one of the biggest, because I think about the outsourcing of our power. It seems to me like you were potentially unconsciously outsourcing your power to heal through him. And then when the power was cut off, everything pointed inward for you at that moment.
You know, we weren't even healing together at all, though. It was in that relationship, he was very much just a boy. Like I was just mothering him, you know, just taking care of everything for him, making things really comfortable, just handling everything. And also being extremely avoidant and unwilling to be vulnerable at all. You know, so there was no intimacy, no vulnerability, no honesty. And not even that I was aware that that was the case. It was just, that's how like locked up I was from not having actually honored any of the pain that I had been through. Right. So by the time our relationship ended and I'm slammed with this tidal wave of grief, I'm like, oh my gosh, now I'm grieving every single heartbreak that I've ever had in my life because I've never actually had the time or space or the tools to feel this. So I've never let myself feel. So now I'm going through this horrific breakup and now it's all hitting me. So that was a lot, you know, it was very, very much like a psychedelic journey, but very necessary. And that led me to meeting Ben, you know, my husband, and we've been on a 10-year journey so far. And it's been full of twists and turns for us of healing and growing, but I wouldn't have been able to do any of that if that rupture in my 20s hadn't have happened.
How did the grief from you standing barefoot at the fence to then having a child, how did that grief inform and catalyze your journey?
Well, it's a long journey, you know, it's a lot of years in between. But you know, when I had that experience, I just sort of dove in head first. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do this. And I started doing medicine work. I started sitting in ceremony. I started working with a transpersonal therapist, doing shadow work, mother wound work, breath work. I was just doing it all. You know, I was like fully in. I just lived and breathed healing. Every waking moment I was reading books, I was studying, I was watching YouTubes, I was sitting in a therapist's office, I was sitting in a ceremony. And I would consistently get messages from my guides when I was in ceremony or even breath work that the work that I was doing was to clear a path for my daughter. And in really hard moments, if I was in resistance, I would hear, you know, are you going to leave this for her or are you going to do this work? And so, and you know, then I met Ben and we started doing that work together really early, almost right away. 3 months in, we started doing the work together. And in ceremonies together, you know, I would have those visions and those messages that there was a real preparing happening. And we were together for just over 7 years before we had our daughter, 3 years ago. So that's
a solid foundation. We got pregnant after I think 9 months, so we didn't have that like friendship zone. But it's been this beautiful journey, and I'll share this because I know it's in alignment with your work. The mother wound for me, especially being raised by a bipolar mom, was an unconscious projection of really mistrust and hatred towards women.
Yeah.
And it came to me over the course of 6 years in being married to my wife. We actually just got married this year, but in being in union with my wife. And gosh, it was so both liberating, but also so nauseating to actually come to terms with that which I was unconsciously projecting out. But you know what, Shay? Like once it came out, I can't unsee it. Like once I've seen it, I can't unsee it.
Yeah.
And the liberation and the discomfort that was so healing and so incredible was a culmination of 10 years of this podcast and my entire life. Like I've had many moments barefoot by the fence, for sure.
Yeah, totally.
Have you had a moment like that? I'm not fishing in your brain for some kind of cool story. I'm really my intention is to connect with your heart and receive whatever wisdom has come from a peak experience or a peak healing that you went through so that somebody else may be inclined to be gravitated towards that healing.
Well, in regards to healing my mother wound, you know, for me, it was Ben and I, we went and sat with ayahuasca together maybe 6 months into our relationship. And I had sort of set the intention for years prior to meeting him that I wanted to sit with this medicine.
That's a
And
special man. 6 months in.
yeah. Well, he sort of guided the whole process. Like he had the whole thing organized because he had sat already. And so he sort of, he was a bit of an initiator for me in a lot of ways too. There was a safety there of feeling like he kind of had the path laid out a bit. So I decided to, trust and go with him. And yeah, we went and we sat together for the first time, and it was my first time. And we sat for 3 nights, and it was awful. Like, I always kind of giggle when people say or presume that ayahuasca could ever be an addiction or that that you could, just like recreationally use it. I'm like, you've never done ayahuasca, have you? It's not fun. Some people have beautiful journeys, don't get me wrong, but it's not a fun thing to do. It's really intense, and it's work. And I don't work with that medicine anymore, but in those journeys, I went through hell and back. I relived all of my trauma. I went into the ancestral jungle and cut cords. I became my mother and went into her mental illness. Like, I had the wildest experiences, and so many more stories from those first few nights. But one thing that happened that was really, really profound that I will always carry with me is on one of the nights, at the end of reliving sort of all of her trauma, I had these like projector screens go up into the sky. And on one side was my mother, the mother archetype, who owed me something, who should have showed up for me in a certain way, who had this duty. And then there was the other bubble, and it was just woman on her journey, woman's fighting to survive, just a woman, just a human being. And there was just this split for me of, okay, mother archetype, like that didn't happen. Woman, she's here, and just full compassion and acceptance and just a letting go of the attachment and the need for her to fulfill some archetype for me, and just to let her off the hook there and say, okay, I can just see your humanity. I can just see how hard you fought to survive to get here. And I'm just grateful for this life, and thank you for this life. And that is all that you owe me. We are complete. You don't owe me anything anymore. And of course, there's always going to be a little tinge of sadness and a longing and an ache of, oh, it would be so nice to have experienced the mother in this lifetime, but there's no more attachment to it, and there's no more expectation. That debt is cleared, and that really, really helped me.
Wow, I could literally see the screens as you were describing that. That's so profound. And I think about, like, whether you believe in the AI theory that it's a simulation, I really don't give a shit. I know we're here, and it's a school to learn how to unconditionally love you, me, all of us, and self. And so that's the thing that's most important to me. It's this undulating journey. Sometimes it feels like a washing machine where I think I'm good. And then I remember interviewing Kelly Brogan. She's like, well, healing is a spiral. So the spiral gets bigger, but you still have lessons that come back around. Have you had a lesson that's come back around about the mother archetype and just woman? Has that resurfaced in any way since your journey?
I mean, it's happening within me for sure as a mother, and the grief of meeting my child in the most vulnerable state and really feeling like I've met her soul, and understanding that she came here with her own contract and her own agenda, and that I actually don't get to interfere with that in the ways that I would like. Like, I don't get to keep her safe from everything. I can't protect her from heartbreak or loss, and I'm going to have to leave her one day too. There's all of this grief in that. And then there's the moments where I'm just not being my best self, where it's like 4 a.m. and she's ripping on my nipples and screaming for a snack, and I'm like losing it. And I'm like, okay, that's not the kind of mom I thought I would be. It's like, It's
Yeah.
just, it is spiralic. And so it's human and intense and all of the things. But the interesting thing for me was when I first had her, a lot of people, they will describe having their own inner child come up really strongly or their own core wounds arise. And what I found that really surprised me was that when I had her, what was being triggered for me was my mother's inner child. It was like every time my daughter would cry really intensely or something, I would be looking at her, holding her. I would just have these flashes of my mother as a baby and an infant and just sort of feeling the grief of how she was treated and how she was unloved by her own mother, and just really seeing the innocence and the vulnerability. It's one thing to really understand that we're innocent and vulnerable, but when you have a child and you're responsible and you're seeing that little being in your hands, it really puts things into perspective, And so that was hard to feel that. And so it was like I was grieving for her. I didn't expect that, I didn't think that was going to happen, but that's what came up. So you just never know. And I think that's the same with getting married, as or like you get married or you have a child or you make this upgrade in your life in some way where you go deeper into commitment, into love. And then the thing that comes on the other side of that you now have to work through might surprise you because you don't always know what's there until you step into it. Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I believe that real, true, connected, conscious love, whatever vernacular you want to use, let's call it conscious partnership.
Yeah.
It is a complete mystery at times, but there's this palpable undercurrent of love, of earned wisdom.
Yeah.
And what I experienced with my wife is like, I love her now more than ever. Like I can feel my whole body tingling as I'm talking to you about her. But it's because I've learned how to love Josh. I've learned how to love myself.
Yeah.
Yet if we aren't conscious, and I'm curious how you feel about this, if we aren't conscious about the things that have been imprinted from our upbringing, and also if you look at the research and data from Wolin's work or just any kind of lineage work, it's somewhere between 2 to 7 generations that actually impact the neurology, especially if you look at the cherry blossom study where they had the mice smell the cherry blossoms, and then 2 generations later, they could measure the hypervigilance in the offspring. What I'm saying is this is spiritual and it's scientific.
Yeah.
So how do you make sense of these two worlds of like your own maturation process as a mother, sitting there with your daughter, feeling the emotions of your own mother, and also knowing that you're a spirit in a body that's coded by imprints from lineage? How do you make sense of these two worlds at times?
I try not to make too much sense of it and try to just trust in it. You know what I mean? Because I just know that I don't know. And I know that I don't know. I know that sometimes it's really scary and it's really painful to love this deeply. And I know that no matter what, my daughter is going to have wounds and she's going to have things to heal. And some of that's probably going to be because of me, and some of it's going to be because of the generations behind me. And that's just the reality. And so, my biggest work, I feel, is trust and surrender and devotion to, really loving as deeply as I can, being as honest with myself as I can, being as honest with her as I can, and preserving essence. That's the message that I really received early on is, as a mother, my job is not to shape her and teach her how to be or to instill in her all of these things. I mean, those are aspects of parenting, yes, but the primary goal is just to keep her essence alive, because she's already here as her wholeness, and the fullness of her expression is here now. And mothering and fathering is a preservation of essence in its highest form. And so that's always my work. And, there's a lot of people who are like, I don't want to have kids because I don't want to mess them up, or this world's too painful. And I do get that. It is painful and it is really messed up and it is confronting. It's one of the most heartbreaking journeys ever, but it's also the most beautiful, and it is worth it.
Profoundly put. I knew when I was in high school that I wanted kids, and I don't have any shame or blame on people that don't want to have children. If that's their path, I totally respect that. I could not imagine a world where I don't get to see my children. I can't even imagine it. And I think about the work that's required. Again, I'm going back to the title of your book, right? Becoming the one. It's such a powerful short phrase. I think about even, I don't know if you've seen the movie Matrix, where he puts his hand up, right? And Neo becomes the one. And essentially what he was doing is he was just making a declaration. He was deciding. It's a very famous scene in the Matrix. Have you watched the movie at all? Or
Yeah.
Okay, so you know. So he puts his hands up, and instead of violence, instead of hatred, instead of anger, his fuel source was pure love. And I think that becoming the one, what I can feel in the essence of your work, talking about preserving the essence, is letting people be who they are, but also as a parent having bright guidelines of what's behaviors that's not going to harm them, but also allowing them to flourish. It seems like a paradox at times for me, because I want my children to be in their own essence, as you describe. Yet I also know that they're going to have moments in their life, and it like crushes me to think about this, where they're going to have to choose to put their hand up in love or not. And so I feel like my role, and I'm curious how you feel about your role in preserving the essence, is essentially just to be a model in the way that I live my own life, that they know what to do unconsciously in moments where their mind and their neurology is screaming at them to abandon themselves or to shame themselves or to blame themselves. My role as a father is to provide containment of what it really means to be in the presence of a man who feels that he loves himself first and foremost. And then secondarily, that they can just learn how to be that love, obviously through my wife as well. Do you feel the essence of my question, or can I ask it to you in a different way?
Yeah, I think, well, it sounds more like a reflection to me. And to me, it's about self-trust. It's about really modeling self-trust and helping our children continue to be in touch with their instincts. Like it's really that simple to me, because yes, they're going to encounter harm, and they're going to encounter people who want to take advantage, and they're going to encounter all sorts of things, and they're not always going to make the perfect decision. Nothing that we do is going to prevent them from living out these lessons that their soul signed up to have. They were like, hey, I'm going to go down there and I want to live. And when you live on earth, you don't get a free pass from having to endure the heartbreak. And so with that, how do we just instill, connection to instinct? So one of the things I do with my daughter is I always take her outside into the forest, and we notice the smells, and we notice the sounds, we notice the feeling, and we notice the smell and the taste of the air, and we really connect to all of the senses. And I say, let's listen to the birds. Can you hear the birds? And we just stand there for a moment. And now we'll go outside, and she'll go, shh, listen to the birds. And she'll pause, and I'll say, what do you notice? How does it feel to be here right now? And when we slow down and just remind ourselves to be connected to our instincts, our kids already have that. So we're just preserving it, because we live in this fast-paced world where the instincts are sort of overridden. And then we forget. So really, even the process of becoming the one, it's just remembering.
It's so good. My wife does a program with Sister Morningstar, who's like a 40-year instinctual living doula, nun, just really powerful. So shout out to my wife, Carrie Michelle. And I remember she brought women over to her house, and I think there was like 15 women. Yeah. And the pace of it was so slow, just like you're describing, almost like hush. And I wonder, I don't know if I'm catching you on a day where you're just super relaxed, or if this is your just baseline of neural system relaxation. Is this just genuinely how you show up to podcast interviews, or am I catching you on an inherently super peaceful day?
I'm actually high right now. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I would say when I'm feeling really relaxed. I didn't sleep very much last night. So yeah, I'm tired and relaxed, and I live in the forest, so things can get pretty chill over here. And I was also I was noticing too, though, while we were talking, I was like, oh, I feel really relaxed, because my daughter is at a place now where she's okay to separate for me to go on a podcast, Whereas
Yeah.
even 6 months ago, it would be screaming and crying and just really painful to try to even come up here. So the whole time I would just be sort of holding that. And I realized, during this session with you, I'm not, because she was like, okay, love you, bye, and give me a kiss. And she's just happy to be with dad. So it's also, stages of life. If you caught me about a year and a half ago on a podcast, probably would have felt a lot more anxious.
Right before we jumped on, my son got stung by a bee. So I was like preparing and setting intentions for your work. And then I ran to the main house and like just held him for 5 minutes. Yeah. It's in these moments where we're not doing anything that I feel like the magic is so palpable. This might seem like I'm waxing poetic, but I wonder what you're feeling from what I'm sharing here. It's in these moments like you and your daughter where she says, shh, or me holding my son in the driveway today where I'm just like pressing some honey on his knee. It's in these moments that we actually recalibrate the way that we relate to life. In other words, my children teach me to slow down. They teach me to be present. They are the ultimate beacon of truth when it comes to how life should be lived. Actually, not even should, just how life gets to be lived, right? Yeah. Have you felt this as well with your daughter? It seems like the forest was one moment. I'm sure there's many others.
Oh yeah. I feel that she's my greatest teacher. Since having her, I've caught like 22 songs. I wrote many kids' books. 2 are being published soon. I just filled with creativity in a really beautiful way. And it's like a total reorientation to what matters. And to be honest with you, the first 2 years was hard because I was like, what do I even care about anymore other than her? Like I was like, I don't even know. Sure. And I needed that time to just really be in that. And, I feel much more connected to purpose again outside of motherhood, but it really is a recalibration and a total reorientation. And they just are so present. And she would reflect back to me. She still does sometimes. I love to dream and I'm always planning. I'm like always planning. Okay. I love creating the next event or, what's the next wheel of the year thing that we're going to do, or what trip are we going to go on, or, how am I going to decorate or whatever. And so I will find myself always talking to her about these future things that we're going to do. And she'd go, now? And I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm just not being here with you right now. And you don't even get the future. Like it's always just now. And so I was like, oh, wow, I really see how often I'm really not in the now. And it's those, those little moments where you could dismiss it or you could really pause and go, oh, okay, that's an invitation. So that, they're endless with these little beings, endless invitations.
Yeah, there's no abandonment in those moments. Like when you described your clarity, the challenge is that if you're open to this, I wonder if you could speak to, let's say a woman who's listening or watching us with us, and she knows that something internally is off. She has an understanding some way that there's been an abandonment of self. From a neurology perspective and also just an awareness perspective, how might she identify that she has abandoned oneself? What would be the clues or the proof that one has abandoned themselves?
Feeling endlessly bitter, feeling endless resentment, exhaustion, wishing you were living a different life. And I've been there actually in the last few years. There's been times where I've felt that because the early throes of motherhood, especially with a high needs child, is no joke. But those are always good signs, like, oh, time to come back to yourself, time to come back. So if you're feeling that overwhelm, angry, easy to lose it, bitter, resentful, just a general dissatisfaction with life, you probably aren't at home in yourself right now. And you probably aren't getting what you need. So, and it's not as easy as just saying, oh, well, just go take care of yourself, especially, in the early throes of motherhood. Like I said, you just do what you can, you get it where you can. But that is part of it for sure. And slowly but surely, once you recognize that, you can start to build that practice again, little moments.
So for y'all watching on Spotify and YouTube, we're holding up the journal. It's a hardcover journal. It's very well done. I'm actually going to gift this to my wife. So thank you for sending it. When you wrote this, when you planned this, were you in the throes of the frictionality of early motherhood? Is that when this was written?
I was pregnant while I wrote that. Hadn't given birth yet. And I love that journal. I love that journal because it was really inspired by my connection to nature and the land that we're on here. We're in 10 acres in basically a giant rainforest full of cedars and maples. And we back onto 300 acres of forest. And there's a real special energy to the land here. And so I really wanted to weave in the lessons of the forest, but also, some of my ocean medicine, lessons that I've received from the ocean, and sort of weave them into somatic practices for healing. Because, we've talked about the mother wound, and to come back to that mother and father wound, what I have found just for myself, and I'm curious if this resonates for you, but, because I couldn't get that divine mother energy, and I've never met my father, so I couldn't get the divine masculine energy either from father, I had to find it somewhere. I had to find that sense of belonging and nurturance. And so for me, it's going to the elements and really finding that connection in nature. And so that's what I wove into the journal too. And I'm curious for you, like where you found that connection.
Yeah, for whatever reason, I noticed on your website when you were speaking that you go into Jung's work. So you're trained in Jungian psychology in some aspects, yes? Mm-hmm. And so when you were speaking to me, what came up for me was Jung's concept of the anima and the animus. Mm-hmm. And we talked about this on the show before, but just briefly I'll share. So I have a feminine energy in me. And if we're looking at the podcast mic, that's why I have the upside down triangle on the microphone, because that's been my biggest learning curve, Shay, in life, is accessing the feminine power inside of Josh. I think it is for most men, by the way, if you ask, and definitely wives would attest to this. Like, yeah, he's not in touch with his feminine part, but the anima is really powerful for me. And it's what most men in society tend to lean into. Where when I grew up, there was about two emotions that were present. It was either frustration or anger. And I noticed that my work of uncoiling and unraveling this stuff was actually embracing the feminine energy inside of me.
Yeah.
And so the healing potency that I got from honestly doing this podcast for a decade plus now, having conversations with souls like you, is what has been my therapy and my collegiate level understanding of human life. And so my answer to you is I found the secrets that I was looking for in the hardest, darkest places of me feeling out of integrity, of me feeling uncomfortable, of me feeling like I didn't know what it was to be a man. I did 2 vision quests and fasted with Tim Kokorin and ayahuasca ceremonies and breathwork. I became a breathwork facilitator and taught that to thousands of students. And I just, like yourself, I went so deeply into the work that I actually watched myself kind of praying to it and justifying my unconscious parts because I was, quote, doing so much work. So it was just this constant seeking, Shay, of what is the truth of my feminine, of my anima? What is the truth of my masculine, my animus? And how can I join these two together, not just intellectually, but how can I live them as a felt sense for me and the people that I care about? And there's no real one PDF that's going to get us there. It's not going to happen. It's just this continuous washing machine of, just because my father didn't get modeled true masculinity and the ability to hold space for a woman to him, doesn't mean that I am cut off from that awareness, that intelligence. That intelligence lives in your daughter and you and me and all of us. And this intelligence is so potent if we actually slow down and meet the darkest part of self in the moments where we want to run, where we want to just run away and just get away from it because it's the partner's problem. It's my ex's problem. It's this other person's problem. It's like I found it in the bottom of the funnel where I was just about to squeeze through. And I'm sure there's going to be other squeezing points too. But I found it in this place of like, wow, everything that I thought about being a man, being with a woman, being married, being a husband, being a leader was really just burned to the ground. And I laugh because I celebrated it. It was a fucking celebration of like, oh God, it feels so good to not have to hold up this mask anymore and just be my fucking self. That's where I found it. And my heart goes out to anybody that hasn't had modeling, but the the paradox is we signed up for this.
Mm-hmm.
We signed up for this school of how to learn it all.
Yeah.
So that's some of how I found it. I'm sure there's a lot more there.
Love that. I have actually another question that I have to ask. If it's okay, we can do a little
All right,
roll.
we're flipping the tables. I love it. Yeah.
Because I'm curious, kind of going back like to maybe 15 minutes ago when we were talking and you said you and your wife, you guys had a child after about 9 months. That's when you got pregnant.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious for you guys because, were you in the honeymoon phase then when you had a child?
No, the friction started right away, but yet
Okay.
the love was so strong. And there was a lot of trauma bonding in the beginning as well, which has been unraveled. And like
Yeah.
you said, and I think it was the first 5 minutes of our show today, sometimes that can be educational and you leave with a lesson. And sometimes it can actually work out. And I'm like so grateful that we have worked out and we're going to continue to work out because I essentially set the tone in the relationship. I set a container, not from domination, not from dogma, but I set an emotional tone where emotional safety is my gift to her. It's my gift to her. And I honestly never knew what that was. Like, I feel emotion in my throat right now just talking to you about this. Like, no one ever showed me, and no one shows most men what it means to really bring and embody emotional safety.
Yeah.
And for so long, I projected it onto her and I projected it onto all women. I tied it back to my mom and I did a lot of healing work there. But yeah, I mean, that's the crux of it is like, we were in a really challenging phase. Like both of our stuff came up, but the love was always palpable in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm always curious because, I'm like, what is it like to have a child at such an early point in your relationship? And I wonder for some couples if it's perhaps easier because they're having this honeymoon phase experience. And then some people are just really in the thick of it. Like when Ben and I first started dating, the first 2 years were really, that's where it really started getting intense. So, I could only imagine if we were
I
to
bet.
have had our daughter at that point, it would have been pretty rough.
It was rough, but also like everyone has their own threshold of what they're willing to stay in or walk away from. And honestly, literally, like I shared with you, this podcast and even this conversation in many ways, yes, I'm learning with you, from you, but we're all experiencing this learning together. And I'm not here to say that people should work out or they should not work out. Like that's their own journey. And, you're going to figure out your attachment styles and you're going to either resonate with Shay's work or not. But my role, which is so beautiful, my role is just to amplify truth and just to teach myself and others how to feel emotions and be honest with themselves. It's not even a reductionization, although it is. Like, it's actually quite simple what I'm doing and what we're sharing today is just these very simple truths. And they're so light. And I feel like lives are really heavy and the perfect PDFs and all the plans and marketing, they get very demonstrative and they get really heavy. So
I love that you keep talking about PDFs. I'm having this moment where I'm like seeing you as a future person being like, why does he keep talking about PDFs? What's a PDF?
Yeah. When PDFs don't even exist anymore, we'll just have like pages that pop up on our glasses or something. Yeah, I love your question. I really appreciate your question. It's not too often that people ask me questions on the podcast. And may I ask you a question in that same vein?
Yeah, please.
So I think about your first 2 years with you and your husband, and there were probably moments where you were forced to say, am I going to grit or am I going to quit? Right? Was there one moment that you can share where you got intuitive hits and you got wisdom that even though it's really hard, it's actually my soul's path to stay? Not just because you could feel the energy of your daughter that wanted to come through, but that there was something really special about him.
Yeah, I mean, he's always been special since, the moment we met. It was just magnetic. We couldn't really be apart. We tried, and I was in resistance because I met him, within the year of my relationship ending. Like I was not planning on being in relationship. I wanted to be single for like 3 years. And he had planned to be single until he was 35. So
wait, hold on. Sorry. He planned to be single until he was 35?
He had set a goal. He was like, I'm going to be single till I'm 35. Right?
Why?
We met. That's just where he was at. He had
Okay.
wanted to build his business and be single till he was 35. And I wanted to be single for the next 3 years. So either way, we were kind of mirroring each other, which we often do. But then we met and it was palpable. We really connected. And so pretty much right away, we became an item. And but then, when we moved in together about a year in, it really amplified our stuff, and our attachment stuff really started to come to the surface. And it got pretty intense for a while, where I was like, if you're going to be this way, like, I don't think I can do this. Like, if you're going to be so avoidant, I'm not going to be in this anymore. And so I sort of set this boundary with him, but through this epiphany that I had that I was sort of suffocating him with my demands to work it out right away and to, show up differently. And in many ways, I was sort of, I was making it a lot worse. So I told him, I'm going to lean out here, and I'm going to start to tend to my own inner child when we're in conflict. And I'm just going to take care of myself, and I'm going to let you do what you need to do. And as I did that, it was pretty miraculous how quickly he started to come around. And then that's when we really started to dive into the attachment stuff. But honestly, like, we were really good. And then we had a child, and then everything came up again. It was like a total recalibration. Like, I thought we were so ready because we were at the place where we were almost bored. We were like, well, our relationship's so easy. We don't really fight anymore. Like, things are just good. So we're ready. And I'm glad that we had that foundation, because we wouldn't have survived without it. But it was rough. Like, we're just starting to come into this really beautiful place now, of rebirth together. Like, we were in dark winter territory for a while. So it was a lot.
What's the truth about love that took you the longest to accept?
I think the hardest thing for me to accept about love in general is just that it comes with deep grief. And in order to really let yourself go into love, you have to also let yourself break open to the heartbreak that will inevitably come from that. Because to truly love means to let go of control. And I don't want to do that.
That's honest. Yeah. The ultimate paradox is, like, when I used to do this a lot, because I had a lot of hypervigilance in my life, and I wanted to control everything because I had a fear of being hurt. Is that essentially what I'm hearing from you?
It's just a fear of, I don't even know how to quite explain it to you. It's like a fear of getting lost in the pain. Yeah. It's not even fear of being hurt by someone else. It's a fear of being swallowed up by the grief and the heartbreak.
I can so relate to that. I've had many moments with talk therapists in the past where I'd be like, I feel if I go into the sadness, I won't come out.
Yeah.
I literally feel like I'll never come out of it. So then how have you trained your mind, your neurology, your heart, your being to rise out of that?
Yeah. Well, when I was all those years ago, when I was in my 20s and I was going through that really, really tumultuous time, this quote kind of came through me one night when I was journaling, and it was just, pain is a passage, not a prison. And I really just had this vision of this tunnel and this like light, and knowing that my pain was leading me somewhere. It wasn't a place that was to keep me stuck. I wasn't going to get trapped there. It was a passageway. And if I could just continue to follow that, there's also, there is a beautiful poem, and I think it's called To Know the Dark. And the words are, to go in the dark with the light is to know the light. To know dark, go without sight. And it's that truth, right? If you want to go into the dark, to know the dark, you have to let yourself go, And so that one really stays with me as well. It's a really good anchor.
Thank you for the song. I think about this phrase. It's like an overused phrase, Shay. Divine union, sacred union. But the real essence, like the real embodiment of divine union, like what does divine union require that a fantasy can't give?
Well, we sort of touched on it in the beginning, which is that really deep relationship to self, right? Because a true divine union is these two people who know themselves and are devoted to love, not extraction. Right? When you come to a relationship for the sake of giving yourself over to love and really truly healing through that experience, you're not there to extract. And that requires a level of generosity and trust and patience that I'm still learning. Like Ben and I are definitely still learning. We're only 10 years in, and it's, some people might think that's a long time, but when you've been in a relationship for 10 years, you're like, well, we're just getting started. So it's just such a long, beautiful journey. And I think it's so much about putting your swords and your egos down and really meeting yourselves, like just totally vulnerably.
Yeah, it's interesting. I interviewed a man named Dr. Stephen Young twice, and the audience absolutely loved it. Like just millions and millions of people across the world resonated with this. And I wonder if you resonate with this or not. He said that the word vulnerable can actually be used as a weapon. And having an open heart means that you have claimed inner safety no matter what the exterior circumstance. In other words, you can walk down a street, you can feel safe in yourself no matter where you go. But asking for someone's vulnerability or letting someone know, it's called strategic vulnerability. Hey, guys and gals, just to let you know, I'm about to be vulnerable. It's like, well, are you really going to be vulnerable? Because if you said you were going to be vulnerable, you would just say it. You wouldn't have this preloaded phrase. Do you find that the more work you've done on you, the more you just feel safe, and vulnerability is a byproduct?
Well, I think we're talking about different avenues too. I think what I'm hearing and when you describe that is like performative vulnerability, which we see most commonly on things like social media, where
and there may be a shred of vulnerability in there, but it's packaged in this way of like showmanship.
It's a stage of consciousness for sure. It's a place of consciousness, and there's still a deep longing to be seen and to be acknowledged, and that's okay. It's just a stage of growth where that person is at, where they really want to be seen, and so. If you can recognize that, and then, can you really remember that, the people on social media who are seeing you are not going to be seeing you anyways. They're seeing whatever they want to see. When it comes to relationship, I think anytime we demand vulnerability, there's already no chance at it. True vulnerability is sort of organic and innate, and it happens on its own timeline. You can't force vulnerability out of somebody. And you don't have to announce it either. It really is a decision in the moment, or it's an aha, or it's just this light bulb that happens where something true wants to be shown. And usually that is in private moments, And so, but it takes practice and it takes awareness to be able to let yourself go there, because you might have an aha moment in front of your partner where all of a sudden you're having these realizations about, what this moment represents for you, or what's being triggered, or what you're really feeling. But will you actually say it? Will you actually let them know? Will you actually let your guard down? Will you actually let them see your hurt? Will you cry instead of get mad, right? Like, will you actually let them in? And that is the practice and the learning. And, my husband and I have said many times, like, one of the hardest things for us both is just to say, ouch, that hurt, instead of getting defensive. Just even that is a practice.
And powerful. Powerful AF. Gosh, this has been so good. I've never shared this on a podcast, and we can jump off of the cliff here and you can tend to the rest of your life after this. I've really enjoyed this. And the reason I've enjoyed it is because your singing, your truth, your embodiment of your work is a felt sense for me. It's really special in the world. There's a lot of people in our, I guess you could say, self-growth, personal development, spirituality, wellness world. You actually mentioned it before. You said it's just a level of consciousness. And I used to get annoyed by them. I used to get really upset. But now I just know that there's this actually came through when I was reading Young Pueblo's book. I just got it from a therapist, and I was reading some of his poetry. And I went out for a walk, and I was talking to my mom on the phone, of all places. And I just said, yeah, Mom, look, love is everything, and truth is how it speaks.
Mm.
And she was like, what? I got to write that down. And I'm like, yeah, I got to write that down too. I don't know where it came from.
Love it.
Love is everything. And truth is how it speaks.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And I just want to thank you for doing the work. You could have chosen a different path. You could have gone down a road of addiction yourself. You could have exited and just been like an NPC and not been of service. Like, deep bow to you for doing the work, not just for women to rise, but for humanity, for men and women to rise. And I wonder if there's anything that we touched upon that you feel needs or gets to have greater bandwidth. Is there anything that we spoke about, or is there anything that you feel inspired to share as we end this conversation of becoming the one, the necessary work to become the one that stops this repeated cycles that we all experience if we're unconscious to them?
I think the message that I would share that has really been front and center for me, even in the last few years of motherhood, is how unconsciously we really do want to confirm our old stories, and how there can be a cellular drive within us that we don't even recognize to repeat patterns, right? To repeat the patterns of our lineage, whether that's our maternal lineage or our paternal lineage. And so you might feel with great certainty that you need to burn down your life or sever yourself from love or, do something drastic. And my invitation to you is to always future pace it a bit and ask yourself, is this going to really make my life better? Am I going to be in closer connection to love, to community, to truth, to authenticity? Or is this actually a defense mechanism? And by doing this, will I actually be further from growth, from connection, from love, from truth, from community? Imagine that. And so it takes practice to notice where you might be trying to live out some cellular memory or pattern that actually doesn't need to live out any further. And so the invitation is to consider yourself the assignment of cycle breaker and change maker for your lineage.
Let's leave it right there. Shay, thank you so much for sharing space with me today. Y'all get this book, Becoming the One. It's everywhere books are sold, yes?
Yes. And 18 languages and counting.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Y'all share this podcast if it resonates. I know it does. And look, you never know how you can impact someone's life just by the gift of sharing. So share this podcast if what we spoke about today with Shay hit you in the heart, if you have curiosity about it. You literally never know who you're going to impact. So until Shay and I see you on a future episode, I'm wishing you love, wellness, but most importantly, peace and power. You cannot have power unless it comes from peace. We'll see you next week.